Good morning. We are still waiting for two of our speakers, but I think we can already start. It's a pleasure to be with all of you, and it's actually an honor to have such a distinguished guest speakers with us today. Just so that you know, you all will need to have, we need to have translations both from Spanish and from Portuguese. So the first speaker that will speak in Spanish, the channel is number 1. And when the second speaker speaks in Portuguese, it will be channel 4, okay? So they will be distributed to you. So let's do that while we still wait for our colleagues, the headsets. Thank you. Funciona? Oui. And so, first thing that I would say is that just imagine that our chairs are the same level as yours. and if there's one thing I learned in living with the Chavanti Indians is that the best way of conversation is always on a round circle where everybody is at the same height, at the same level of conversation. Those are true conversations. So in spite of ours being a bit higher, imagine we are at the very same level. This will be a conversational tone, what we want here. But as I was saying, it is really an honor to have such distinguished guests. And it's a pleasure to be co-hosting this with CI. And we will have 4 guests today. And I would actually ask them to introduce themselves. So please, Kristen Walker-Painamilla, if you could introduce you.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Bon dia. My name is Kristen Walker-Painamilla, and I'm the Senior Vice President for the Center for Communities and Conservation International.
Mi nombre es Tuntia Catán. Soy de Pueblo Shuar, de Amazonía Ecuatoriana. Actualmente soy vicecoordinador de COICA, coordinadora de las organizaciones indígenas de la cuenca amazónica, presente en 9 países.
Gracias. And we're still going to have other 2 guest speakers. One is Toya Mancineri. He is a representative of COIAB, which is the coordinator of Brazilian Amazon indigenous people organizations. And also Bharati Pathak, who is, she works for the dedicated grant mechanism for indigenous peoples and local communities, and they'll be arriving soon. So I am Leonardo Lacerda, and I am the Global Managing Director for IUCN for our program called Tackle Climate Change. And it is a pleasure to be here with you today. And I'll start by saying that the objective of this panel is to talk about 2 things that are really critical. It's about rights and it's about governance. And we've been seeing, important announcements here about increased funding for indigenous people. And we know how important rights and governance is behind about how some of these funding mechanisms operate. And here we are lucky to have already a few of the representatives that look at these funding mechanisms already indigenous run mechanisms. So I think it will be a very interesting part of the discussion here. At TNC, we have a very deep respect for communities and cultures as a very core value of our organization. And we've been partnering with indigenous people and local communities for many decades. People is central to what we do. But I must say that our history is always imperfect. There have been missteps. But for us, what is really important is the commitment to do things right and to learn through real partnerships where it's by building trust and reinforcing trust that we are capable of overcoming and learning mutually, not only unilaterally. And so as part of that learning, we've developed two things that I'd like to share with you. One is a human rights for working with indigenous people and local communities. This is that document. You know, I just entered TNC. It is a very important thing. Anyone entering the organization needs to read it and absorb it and live that document, which has two purposes. One is to respect and actively promote the human rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and the other is to improve the practice of nature conservation together with people. And it is around 9 main principles. The first is to honor, before anything, the right of self-determination of indigenous peoples, and understanding it's their choice. It's their free choice to get engaged or not on whatever they want to get engaged. And the second is ensure that there is a prior engagement with them before we start anything, before we announce anything, before we launch any project. So prior engagement is critical. And also the informed decision-making. So it's not only informing, but really making sure that both parties have all the information needed to go forward consciously in any engagement. And we also deem very importantly what we call the right to withhold consent. That is, if any of the parties think that would not like to get engaged and want the engagement to stop, it should stop. So, and beyond this document, which is much more detailed, I don't want to go into the specificities of it here, but we have also a document for the practitioners that gets into the nuts and bolts of how to do conservation with people, and that we call that Strong Voices, Active Choices, a practitioner's guide. And that guide guides us into 4 main things. First, how to secure rights, actively secure rights for over lands, waters, and resources for indigenous peoples and local communities. The other is how to strengthen, to ensure that there are good systems of governance in place and good leadership. And the third is how can we ensure good dialogue, and finally ensure that in everything we do, livelihood is at the center of what we think, ensuring livelihoods and economic livelihood choices are there. So what I'd like to, when we came here, we saw a video of a Clayoquot sound in an island in Canada called Vancouver Island, and that was one of the examples of a program we have, which is called the Emerald Edge, which cuts across from southeastern Alaska down to northwestern US, which is one of the most important um, um, temperate rainforests in the globe. And we've been working on this area now of around 100 million acres, or 400, what is it, 40 million hectares, with various different indigenous groups, and particularly to try to support indigenous people's rights and help some of them to move from a excessive dependence on logging. And we're going to be seeing here one example that I'd like to ask my colleague to hear about, the example of Alaska Seacoast Trust. So if you could please show that.
The Sustainable Southeast Partnership started as an idea that Southeast Alaska need. The Sustainable Southeast Partnership started as an idea that Southeast Alaska need not be a region of conflict, that we could come together across divides, that we could build a stronger future for our communities, our region, our lands and waters, and our people together. The Sustainable Southeast Partnership is a dynamic collective uniting diverse skills and perspectives to strengthen cultural, ecological, and economic resilience across Southeast Alaska. Our network includes tribal governments, community-minded organizations, local businesses, native corporations and entities, culture bearers, educators, and state and federal agencies, storytellers, and more. We envision self-determined and connected communities where Alaska Native values continue to inspire society, shape our relationships, and ensure that each generation thrives on healthy lands and waters. Whether through community forestry initiatives that are defining what collaborative land management can look like on the Tongass, feeding our people during a pandemic, catalyzing affordable housing solutions in our villages, or supporting our youth to develop job opportunities and optimism for their future, the SSP is improving the lives of Southeast Alaskans and the resilience of our region. We are proving that when the Alaska Native values that have always governed our relationships to the land, to our economy, and to each other are shared as a foundation for collaborative work, we can accomplish great things.
SSP makes me feel like I belong, like I'm part of something bigger. Like I have valuable contributions for my community and to the region. Like I'm wrapped in a blanket of friendship and support. The SSP gives me hope for the future of all Southeast Alaskans.
The SSP provides a powerful platform for sharing resources, creating partnerships, and finding local sustainable solutions to Southeast's unique energy challenges.
Part of this process is not just healing our lands, but healing our relationships with one another and making the future possible for my grandbabies and their grandbabies.
I have found that SSP provides an outstanding method for effective collaboration on matters relating to human resources, on natural resources, such as what you see behind me, and all of those resources we as people want to be sustainable.
The SSP means working to help local businesses thrive.
The SSP is a commitment to future generations.
The SSP means trust and collaboration. It means leaning in and learning together.
The SSP means doing the work with other awesome people who also love and live in this place. The SSP is progress over perfection.
It's a different way of doing business. It's a different way of looking at natural resources and stewardship for the lands and the waters that are important to my community and to myself. Thank you, SSP.
To me, SSP is a way for the communities of Southeast Alaska to work together so that the region and its resources are managed and sustained by people that are from these communities and are indigenous to these lands.
Building a robust and diversified economy in the face of cycles of boom and bust extraction, healing from colonial trauma, addressing a rapidly changing climate or a global pandemic. The challenges we face are enormous, but we believe we can meet them if we stand together with our roots intertwined. We're surrounded by opportunity, by cultural ingenuity, by grit and persistence, by people who show up for one another again and again. What we're announcing today is building a new model for the future for our homelands. It's taking the work and relationships we've built for over a decade and allowing us to level up, to go deeper and wider, and whether you've been involved for the last 10 years or if this is your first time hearing about us, there's now a role in it for you too.
Thank you. So I would like now to invite Tutiak to speak about the holistic agreements that COICA has been developing and implementing. So Tutiak.
Hola. Sí, es importante el tema que has abordado, el tema de derechos, y creo que eso es lo que nosotros hemos planteado en esta COP. El derecho en términos de aumentar la tenencia de tierra y garantizar la tenencia de tierra, derechos culturales, derechos económicos y el tema de derecho de la naturaleza. Ese es un nivel. Y el otro nivel es el tema de ejercer dentro de los derechos ganados como un espacio territorial, ejercer la gobernanza del espacio territorial que tienes. Y ese ejercicio de la gobernanza implica algunos aspectos, como por ejemplo planificar, hacer ordenamiento de tu territorio, el tema de uso de bosques, de conservación, de iniciativas, tanto culturales, iniciativas innovadoras, entre otros. En ese aspecto, en la Amazonía, creímos que faltaba un programa con una visión concreta, pero a largo plazo. Entonces empezamos a conversar sobre unir esfuerzos entre la experiencia que tiene COICA en términos de gestión holístico de territorios dentro de la estructura de cada comunidad. Como nosotros decimos, gestión holística significa ser lo que eres en tu pueblo, administrar tu bosque, tener tu casa y en las comunidades básicamente tener una prosperidad, un nivel de vida plena. Entonces, eso es el concepto y también queríamos unir con el esfuerzo y la experiencia que habían hecho CI, Conservación Internacional, con el programa de acuerdos de conservación. Entonces la discusión empieza de que, bueno, no podemos hablar solamente de conservación cuando la gente vive en el terreno, ¿no? Y tampoco desde la comunidad puede hacer las cosas solas sin apoyo tanto de la COICA y de los aliados. Entonces, creímos que era necesario emprender un programa que tenga líneas que coadyuven estas experiencias, tanto de COICA y CI. Entonces se genera una idea que se llama Acuerdos Holísticos para la Vida Plena, que es una combinación de experiencia de CI y COICA. Entonces ahí lo que decimos es prácticamente trabajar en la línea de preservación de lo que nos queda en la Amazonía. O sea, hay que garantizar, conservar, pero no desde el enfoque de los estados, de los gobiernos, que es declarar áreas protegidas, sino desde el enfoque de cada pueblo debe de planificar para preservar el espacio, el bioma territorial que tiene. Y el otro componente es el tema de restaurar lo que está degradado, dañado. Entonces, debe haber un programa con esa línea. Pero también tenía que haber un programa con enfoque de gestión del territorio, pero con enfoque de implementación de iniciativas, emprendimientos, con esta visión de economía indígena o comunitaria. Pero esto se basa en que el tema de preservar o conservar y restaurar y todo lo que es generar los emprendimientos necesitaban, tienen un costo, ¿no? Tienen un costo. Y lo que estábamos pensando y tenemos pensado es que se realicen mediante, no sé cuál es la palabra, aunque no me gusta mucho, es el término de incentivo. Es como, incentivo me suena un poco medio como, bueno, te doy algo porque estás haciendo algo, sino en términos de derecho, darle a la persona lo que realmente tiene que recibir por preservar, por restaurar y para que implemente sus propias iniciativas. Entonces, esto nace de una experiencia propia de que las comunidades tienen que llegar a un acuerdo en una comunidad o entre comunidades o entre organizaciones para preservar un área determinada, que ellos decidan preservar y ser delimitado y tener una garantía a largo plazo para la conservación y tener también otros lugares espacios de restauración. Lo que estamos aprendiendo ahora mismo, estamos haciendo desde COICA en Ecuador y Bolivia, estamos haciendo iniciativas de restauración en este ámbito. Hemos hecho con enfoque de pueblos indígenas, restauración de enfoque desde pueblos indígenas, no como un equipo, digamos, de técnicos, científicos, que te dicen, o forestales, que dicen, bueno, tienes que sembrar así o por allá, sino las mismas comunidades, generalmente están trabajando jóvenes, es liderado por los jóvenes, e invitan a los mayores para que pues, les comenten por qué deben pues, sembrar un árbol, qué tipo de árboles tienen que sembrar. Entonces ha habido una discusión. Lo que yo he hecho es una experiencia. En Ecuador hemos ya restaurado 200 hectáreas, en Bolivia, con los compañeros de CIDOB, también justamente el presidente está aquí y nos vamos a reunir hasta donde han avanzado, pero la meta es 200 hectáreas más allá en Bolivia. El tema es lo siguiente, la misma comunidad, hicimos dos trabajos, uno fue con metodología de mingas, como se dice allá. Minga es, bueno, todos colaboramos, todos vienen, ponen el hombro, siembran y, bueno, la autoridad convoca, se genera toda la alimentación y viene toda la gente a trabajar. Y hacen el trabajo de preparar el terreno, de movilizar toda la logística y sembrar la plantita. El tema, eso fue una metodología. Y la otra metodología fue trabajar con las mujeres en una comunidad. Pero no era a través de la metodología de mingas, sino a través de la metodología de incentivo. O te doy porque tú vas a hacer eso, te doy un incentivo físico o económico. Entonces, se realizó que cada mujer pueda restaurar con las plantas que ella quisiera, frutales, alimenticios, maderables, espirituales, todo lo que quiera sembrar, pero que me garantice que estas plantas están ahí. Y que eso no es de la comunidad, sino es de ella, es de su familia, es para sus hijos. Entonces, cada persona decidió, o sea, cada mujer decidió sembrar ya sea 1 o 2 hectáreas más, o algunas hectáreas también. Entonces, se vio que en algún momento dimos el seguimiento con los jóvenes, hicieron buen trabajo. Ahora están 100 hectáreas solamente con un grupo de mujeres sembradas en un lugar. 100 hectáreas sembradas, ellas son felices. Y en algún momento llegamos y dijimos, bueno, había un compromiso de darles $500 por hectárea. Pero nadie creía porque mucha gente, muchas organizaciones, inclusive el Estado, a través del Ministerio del Ambiente, habían llegado con similares programas a través de, en Ecuador se llama Programa Amazonía. Habían llegado con similares programas, pero no les habían cumplido. Entonces tuvimos muchos problemas porque decían, bueno, ¿ustedes quiénes son? ¿Cómo sabemos que nos van a cumplir? Pero bueno, eso fue un acuerdo, como decir, no había nada, digamos, legal entre ellos y nosotros, sino un acuerdo de palabra, no sé cómo se dice, acuerdo de damas o de caballeros. Pero sin embargo ellos cumplieron y en un momento tuvimos que llegar y darles. Y esta vez la experiencia que nos enseñó es que cuando ellos hacen y creen que es para ellos, lo hacen muy bien. Pero cuando es algo, eso fue la experiencia que tuvimos en otro lugar, cuando es algo comunitario, es de todos. Entonces ya lo hacen a su manera, a veces no lo hacen bien. Entonces eso fue el aprendizaje que tuvimos. Entonces eso es una experiencia que tenemos en Ecuador y los acuerdos holísticos quiere escalar a nivel de toda la cuenca amazónica. Con los acuerdos holísticos tenemos pensado que tenemos que hacer acuerdos con entre comunidades, entre organizaciones, a nivel del país y también, ¿por qué no?, a nivel en los espacios binacionales o trinacionales. Entonces, la base fundamental para empezar ese tipo de trabajos es llegar a explicar que esa actividad es para ellos y que la comunidad esté de acuerdo. Y tuvimos la buena suerte que no todo el mundo se sumó porque no nos creían, sino unas que otras mujeres se sumaron, las que tenían alguna esperanza que íbamos a seguir. Si hubieran hecho todo el mundo, quizás no nos hubiera alcanzado los recursos que teníamos. Entonces, la base fundamental para trabajar en temas de acuerdos holísticos es llegar a un acuerdo con la comunidad, ver qué es el plan que tienen, si tienen plan de vida o no. Si tienen, pues reforzarlo, lo que tienen, y si no tienen, ayudar a hacerlo. Y luego el otro nivel es ya pues determinar las áreas. Es la primera experiencia que tenemos, pero la idea es, lo que tenemos es determinar áreas de conservación, áreas de restauración y áreas de producción, pensando esos cultivos que estamos sembrando o las plantitas, que se puede decir en términos más sencillos, es con una visión de que en un futuro puedan tener la capacidad de cosechar y puedan generar, digamos, productos con valor agregado. Entonces, eso es el trabajo que estamos haciendo y es una cadena hasta llegar, digamos, con estos acuerdos, lo que estamos pensando es una cadena larga con todo lo que es de acuerdos, planificación, su plan de vida, términos de incentivo y ya un convenio, digamos, formal a largo plazo, a 10, a 20 años plazo. Lo que al menos ahora estamos pensando es hasta 30 años de compromiso, pero por compromisos de décadas, de 10 en 10. Entonces, ese es el plan que tenemos. Nuestra ambición es hacer ese trabajo en la Amazonía. Tenemos alrededor de 300 a 350 millones de hectáreas. Entonces, nuestra meta es hacer ese trabajo con organizaciones nacionales en cada país, pero en un espacio, en un lugar específico allá en el terreno, y llegar a una meta a 30 años, llegar a la preservación, a la gestión de 200 millones de hectáreas. Entonces es una meta, una ambición bastante fuerte y que hay que empezarlo, y ya hemos empezado, como les digo, y ya tenemos en Ecuador esos 200 hectáreas que hemos sembrado. Estamos hablando alrededor de 150,000 plantas sembradas.
Fantástico. Quisiera invitarte a ti, Johnson. I'd like to invite you to represent the dedicated grant mechanism. So if you could speak to us a bit about how does the mechanism operates, how is it conceived by indigenous people, and how does it work for indigenous people?
Thank you very much. for the invitation and closer. Okay, we'll take out this. No estás con COVID, ¿no? Okay. So the dedicated grant mechanism for indigenous peoples and local communities is a program that receives funding through the Climate Investment Fund, comes through the Forest Investment Program, and I think it's 10% goes to indigenous peoples in this program called the DGM. So how we are organized is that we have a global project and 12 different projects in each of the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The total amount, we started with 80 millions, and now we have 75 because one country decided to leave, let's say. So how we operate is that in each of the countries, indigenous organizations and local communities, they have organized themselves in order to create a national steering committee in order to manage the funding, to make decisions and be like the leading group and the decision making in the country at the national level. So in most of the cases, they have used the existing already organizations, like let's say in Peru, they have two big organizations, CONAP and IDESEP. Their members are members of the National Steering Committee. In other countries, like in Ghana, perhaps they don't have these like huge organizations, but they are mostly community-based. They have implemented a consultation process in the regions of the project and then decided to nominate the members of the National Steering Committee. So in each country, they have national steering committees to lead and guide the project. So the funding for each country goes from $4.5 to $6.5 million, depending on the country. And from each of the countries, they nominate one of the members to become member of the Global Steering Committee. So in the global project, as Conservation International, we are implementing. We are the executing agency, and we have the Global Steering Committee. That's the part of the governance, and they make decisions in order to support. The main objective of the global component is to exchange the experiences that we are having from each of the countries. So how the funding goes to the community or flows to the community, after having this governance structure, the national steering committees, they make decisions about what activities they are going to prioritize right, in the communities. And in some cases, for instance, they make decisions to not just to make a process to compete and get the funding, and just to support an area. For instance, this is an interesting case in DRC. They didn't want to compete in order to get the funding, to access the funding. So they have decided in this region, these communities, they're going to work together and come up with a proposal, and then access to the funding and implement there. In other countries, like in, let's say, Burkina Faso, they have decided to compete, and they received like more than 600 proposals, and they only supported 25. And many people, they were disappointed because, they were competing together. That's why in DRC decided to make it a different way. So they have different ways to do that. The second thing after the governance, I believe, is the increased participation of women in the decision-making process. We started very low. Let's say it's not our decision, it's the decision of the leadership in the countries, but they have been increasing in different ways. In Mexico, the National Steering Committee, they have increased the participation of women in the decision-making. In Burkina Faso, they have decided to provide additional points for projects that includes women, in the proposal. In Peru, they have decided to allocate specific funding for women implementation. So, different ways in order to approach to increase the participation of women. Then in terms of projects itself, we have, many projects. Let's say forest management in Mexico, in Mozambique. We have seed banks in Brazil, land tenure, land titling process in Peru and also in Indonesia. And then, several type of projects, different projects, from land tenure, from small projects, medicinal plants, all linked to, to this sustainable development, how to, in the communities, they can manage taking care of the forests or increasing, let's say, working on reforestation and that kind of project. So the funding has been used in the communities directly, and they have decided what kind of projects they're going to implement. We have also a grievance mechanisms there. That is really important to perhaps point out, because we have communities sometimes complaining why I'm not benefited here when my neighbor community is benefited. In the case of Brazil, they are working in the Cerrado area, and families are, some in the Cerrado, others in the Amazon, they don't have access to that funding, so that's perhaps not complaint, but it was an issue of understanding the borders where they're going to support. But also we had complaints in terms of projects implementing why we are not receiving the response of our complaint on time, because the mechanism that we have perhaps is slow, and things like that we've been learning in the process and using each country complaint mechanism in order to strengthen what they already have. So we are not reinventing anything here. We are using or strengthening the same system that they have in countries when they have it, and empowering communities. That's been, the entire project, the purpose of the project is empower communities and connect with this interest of, we have here on climate action. So more or less that is the history of what we are doing on the DGM in general.
Before I pass the word to you, Kristen, I would like to ask both of you, having come to so many different COPs, there's no doubt that this is the one where the indigenous voices are being heard, I think, for the first time, and we're actually seeing at least important commitments, at least in terms of funding for them. How do you see are the greatest challenge to turn this 1.7 billion that has been committed or promised with the current structures that we have? What is the major challenge, and how do you think you're going to be providing a response to those challenges? No sé si has podido comprenderme. Tuntiak, ¿has podido comprender? Okay.
Sí. Bueno, con la experiencia que venimos desde el territorio, nuestra propuesta no ha sido solamente un discurso general y hemos venido aquí a presentar a la COP, ¿no? Es una experiencia desde el terreno, desde el territorio. Además de lo que les comenté con temas de restauración de mujeres, estamos emprendiendo el tema de trabajo con bambú, con jóvenes, que es otro componente de acuerdos holísticos. Ahora, llegando acá, a nivel de la COP, hemos venido haciendo incidencia desde hace algunos meses a través de algunos aliados de que no queríamos estar en la COP y simplemente que seamos los espectadores y pasear acá en el pasillo y no tener acceso a nada. Entonces, eso era nuestra preocupación. Entonces, convocamos a algunos aliados desde que se generó la iniciativa LIVE. Entonces, y nos sentimos que no éramos parte, o sea, ya habían construido los gobiernos y les dijimos, bueno, no somos parte, ¿y cómo vamos a nosotros acceder a esos fondos? No hay. Entonces, se empezó como a cuestionar, a proponer y se genera esta coalición, este consorcio de grupo de algunos gobiernos y privados y lanzan pues un fondo de 1.7 millones. La verdad no sé si eso realmente existe en el banco, pero no sé, o ya se gastaron o se sumaron todo lo que ya tienen programado en gastar, no lo sé. Pero la verdad es que el Reino Unido está muy comprometido y está empujando a esto. Inclusive tenemos mañana una reunión para generar los próximos pasos. Entonces, creo que hay un poco de esperanza, aunque mucha gente dice, bueno, anunciaron y no sabemos cómo van a gastar esa plata, quizás van a ir a través de sus propios canales o a través de los gobiernos, etcétera. Entonces, hay una preocupación porque no hay una claridad. Y tampoco ellos, los que han donado, no tienen claridad cómo van a hacer, o no han sido, o si tienen, no nos han comunicado, no sabemos. Entonces, eso es una preocupación generalizada. Y bueno, por un lado yo les he dicho, les felicito que por lo menos estén anunciando, pero ahora la otra parte es cómo vamos a ejecutar eso con las organizaciones, con las comunidades indígenas en el terreno. Entonces, buscar la mejor canal. Si hay canales actuales que no han funcionado, hay que mejorarlo. Y si hay canales o mecanismos que hay que generar o crear, hay que hacerlo. Y por otro lado, sé que los gobiernos como tal, eso es como el fondo voluntario, ¿no? Que se unen un grupo y lanzan 1.7. Pero sé que los gobiernos también, creo que ayer o anteayer lanzaron, que como gobiernos van también a trabajar con pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales y lanzaron 20.000 millones. O sea, eso es mucho más todavía que no sabemos cómo va a suceder, porque en realidad los fondos climáticos internacionales que reciben los estados, los gobiernos en este caso, se convierten, para ser honesto, utilizados según la coyuntura política. Entonces no es una garantía que va a llegar directamente a las comunidades. Si quieres que llegue a las comunidades, tiene que ser amigo, pana con el gobierno que está en su turno, o si eres, digamos, defiendes tu derecho, prácticamente no te dan. Entonces eso, y por otro lado también, ayer el primer ministro, creo, en su Twitter, anuncia que, bueno, los gobiernos en general se comprometen al tema de desarrollo verde, no sé cómo lo llaman, ¿no? 130 billones de dólares. No sé para cuántos años será, no tenemos idea. Entonces parece que hay mucha ambición de anunciar, pero no hay una claridad de cómo se va a hacer eso en cada país, en los sectores rurales. Creo que una esperanza sería para controlar eso es a través inclusive de la plataforma, que no es mucho su papel, plataforma de conocimientos y prácticas tradicionales de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, que se hagan a nivel nacional para que puedan tener al menos una vocería, porque eso sería casi el único espacio donde los pueblos indígenas pueden tener la vocería. Entonces eso es, no hay una claridad, no hay todavía los pasos siguientes que se va a dar. No quisiera que llegamos otra vez a la COP, después de este anuncio se olvidó y no sabemos nada qué pasó, y otra vez lo mismo en la próxima COP. Eso es el riesgo que hay de esta COP.
Muy bien. Johnson.
Ok, voy a seguir en español entonces. Como caucus oficial de pueblos indígenas participamos en noviembre del año 2000. Entonces ya llevamos como 21 años, o casi, sí, 21 años participando en estas negociaciones. Y la primera vez que escuchamos algo vinculado a pueblos indígenas en el lenguaje de las negociaciones fue en el 2006, cuando incluyeron el tema del conocimiento tradicional en el plan de trabajo de Nairobi, ¿no? Primera vez, Canadá lo propuso. La segunda vez es en el 2007, al año siguiente, cuando en Bali se implementa las decisiones de red, ¿no? Bali dice, bueno, experimenten con red, y ahí dicen, ok, pero hagan que los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales participen. Entonces ya la segunda vez. Luego en Copenhague hubo un acuerdo general que no se aprobó y fue ratificado, digamos, en el acuerdo de Cancún, donde vienen las salvaguardas de pueblos indígenas en el tema de Red Plus, ¿no? El tema, en ese acuerdo creo que hay un artículo respecto al derecho a la tierra, la titulación de las tierras, también se menciona ya. A partir de ahí ya viene incrementándose, digamos, el lenguaje sobre pueblos indígenas en las negociaciones. Uno. Lo segundo es que respecto a los fondos, ya desde 2007, como dijeron que experimenten también con la participación indígena, lo que se dijo desde los pueblos indígenas, y nosotros también queremos fondos para implementar. ¿Dónde están esos fondos para nosotros, no? Entonces ya se empezó a escuchar el acceso directo, ¿no? Queremos acceso directo. Entonces el fondo de inversiones del clima, el Climate Investment Fund, empieza con la idea de crear este fondo en donde ahora nosotros estamos implementando el proyecto para tener un acceso directo. Sobre este 1.7 billones, lo que vemos es que es un compromiso, no sabemos si va a haber dinero. Ahí no queremos, digamos, decir que no creemos, está el compromiso ahí, pero si este mismo país aquí, de su compromiso que tienen ante Naciones Unidas desde el 73, de entregar el 0.7% de su Producto Interno Bruto como donación, digamos, decidieron bajarlo a 0.5 aquí. ¿Cómo es que y de dónde sale entonces el dinero cuando están reduciendo internamente su propio compromiso de apoyar, ¿no? Ahí viene un poco la... Entonces vienen los recursos, nos preguntamos, ¿será igual que los 100 billones de dólares que ofrecieron en el 2009 y que hasta el 2020 no han logrado cumplir? Dijeron que desde el 2020 va a haber los 100 billones de dólares. Dicen que a lo máximo han llegado a 70, creo, billones entre iniciativas privadas y también del Estado. Entonces, pues estos compromisos tomamos con mucho, digamos, positivismo, ojalá sean reales y que esto se efectúe y luego se verá cómo se implemente esto, pero que sean reales, ¿no? Y que lleguen a las comunidades y que la preocupación de algunos no sea tampoco una manera solamente de querer salir aquí con el que el Nature-Based Solution es la solución y aquí está la plata, ¿no? Sí. Pero tal vez mañana no vamos a poder ver ese dinero. Somos optimistas, esperemos que sí, vamos a apoyar, creo que desde las organizaciones también, a que eso se haga una realidad y que se implementen bien los recursos, ¿no? Gracias.
Yo diría sobre todo, I would like to say above all, that the main issue is also the political will to do things. There's a lot of money, but there are in many countries no political will to actually demarcate land to really secure indigenous people's rights. So I was just wondering, how you could be using some of that fund in order to generate that political will if that's possible. But while we still wait for Toya, I'd like to ask you, Kristen, to speak to us a little bit from your perspective.
Thanks. So, similarly, like TNC, Conservation International has been working and partnering with Indigenous people for over 30 years. And we are all members of something called the Conservation Initiative on Human Rights, where we have worked to include human rights in our conservation practice. And again, we are organizations and that continues to evolve and there's lessons learned. But I really want to highlight and pick up on the conversation here is that, Conservation International, like many others, have been working with Indigenous peoples to think through some of these funding mechanisms. And I think this is the challenge that we have. And I think I'll target my comments here is that I think the political will is there at a very high global level, and I think it's great, and we should celebrate that. But we also need to make sure that those things are accountable. And organizations like CI, TNC, and many of the collaborators here need to really support our Indigenous partners in how to be able to move this forward. I think in some of the examples that Tuntiak and that Johnson have given today, and your own example, is really how do you work with those communities to understand how we meet their needs, but also how do we work to meet those global commitments in different ways. And I think part of it is we really need to reimagine how the system happens. And we need to bring together these worlds. And that happens a lot through listening, right? Through dialogues like we're having here today. And Tuntiak highlighted the process that they went through to talk about these holistic agreements. The word incentive isn't the right word to be using with communities, but at the same time, we want to make sure that communities are valued and receive the financing that they should to do the work that they are. We need to move away from referring to Indigenous peoples and local communities as beneficiaries. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have. As we see here, there is leadership here, and that leadership should be supported. We often speak different languages when we talk about these things, and how do we bring together Western science with traditional knowledge to co-create or co-solve these problems? But I also think we as a collective, working with Indigenous peoples and as NGOs, need to come together with a lot of these models, whether it's the holistic agreements, whether it's the dedicated grant mechanism, and whether it's other entities, to find out what works, what doesn't work, and how do we move forward. And I think there are a number of experiences with public funding, and public funding is a challenge for Indigenous peoples to access. It's a challenge for our own institutions often to administer. Similarly, Indigenous peoples and local communities have fought for safeguards which are really important. But at the same time, some of these safeguards are the same challenges that communities have to accessing them. So how do we look at those safeguards, support traditional practices, and they're looking at safeguards from their community lens, but also how do we support the administrative development of indigenous organizations, where they want to have that. Yeah. Not every community or organization is necessarily going to administer $50 million, but I would see several organizations, indigenous organizations, could administer money on behalf of other communities as well. So I think these are the things that we need to talk about and that we need to work through, and we need to support indigenous partners in that co-creation and thinking and design with donors and force donors to also change how they do things. But I know Bharati has been waiting in the security line, so I want to pass the opportunity to her to speak as well. So I'll pass it over.
Yes. You just can speak.
Namaste and good morning, everyone. I'm Bharati Pathak. I'm chairperson of the Federation of Community Forestry Users Nepal, and I'm a global DGM co-chair, and similarly is national DGM co-chair also. I'm so sorry, I was in the a travel, so too much long queue there. I missed the other panelist speech in here. Thank you so much inviting me in here, especially sharing the cases and practice for the community forestry in Nepal. You already know about the Nepal community forestry. So we have a long history, more than 30,000 years. We are working with the community forest users group in Nepal. We have a more than 22,000 community forest users group in Nepal. Especially they are playing to the very good role and protect the forest and conserving the forest. More than 2 million hectares managed by the community forest users group in Nepal. And 10 million people are affiliated with the community forestry movement. So this is a very great example, very model practice in the community forestry users group in Nepal. So like a community forest users group, there is a different ethnic group affiliated in the community forestry movement. Like women is the very strong in the community forest users group. Similarly, we made a like a policy, how can we empower the women in the forest sector, not only community forestry, but highlighting the like a provision for the women leadership in community forestry. We are trying to all over the forest area and natural resource area and develop the women leadership and the position. Like you know, and before the 30 years in Nepal, there was the what types of the like landscape and the like a nature. And when hand over to the community forestry from the government side, now we can see the more greenery and the big change for the when managed by the community forest users group. There is the not only like a democratic practice, there is the more they are protecting the natural forest, more traditional practice in the community forest users group. They are trying. There is the different ethnic group and indigenous group in the community forest users group, and they have a different practice in the grassroots level. And they are protecting the forest and the water and the like a biodiversity, and equally they are going to the inclusive model. Women and the different poor people also staying, and indigenous people are staying in the forest area. So, and the community forestry rules and regulation and the constitution more empowering the different marginalized group and bring the leadership position. So I have just, I would like to sharing with you an example for the like a plantation. And the very few plantation working on CFUG, they are trying to protect the natural forest in Nepal, different types of the forest in Nepal, as the like a timber-based forest, and the other is the non-timber-based like a forest also in there. And naturally comes to the different types of the forest, and they are like a protecting. And the one is the most important, and they spend to the more time protect the forest and bring the greenery and protect the biodiversity and everything. But now, and community forest users group are trying to how can we go to the through the forest resource and sustainable forest management practice in the community forestry, and very linkage with the sustainable development goal. And the women and the youth also coming in the leadership position in community forest users group. So that is the very good practice, and they are trying to support to the livelihood in the poor people and women and the different types of the products. So similarly, we are in together an indigenous network and the local community networks and the women's networks and the other ethnic group networks in together, and the delegated grant mechanism steering committee in Nepal. So we are jointly raising the voice, make a policy. And sometimes it's going to the government and another track. And similarly, we are raising the voice in here, like issues for the carbon rights for the local community and the women's and the youth, and all are spending more time in the protect the forest water. Why not award about the like a carbon market and like a rights for the carbon? So that issues we are raising, like a country level and the globally also. So not only alone in the FACO fund, not only alone in the community forestry, we have a delegated grant mechanism. One is the strong unit in Nepal, and globally we are very connecting and together and raising the voice and the support to the capacity building in local community, indigenous people, women, and the youth. So I think maybe we have many traditional practice and the different cases, but one is the problem, and they have many cases and success stories for the community forest users group, but not coming in the globally. So that is the challenge we are facing. And sometimes we have many policies in the forest sector, like a favor for the local community and indigenous people, local community, especially in CFUG, but not implementing very well. So we are pushing, we are advocating with the government. How can we implementation and secure the rights for the local community? How can we go to the sustainable forest management based on the Paris Agreement? So that agenda we are raising with the government. So thank you. Yeah.
And Bharati, just before you arrived, we were discussing about this commitment of $1.7 billion to indigenous peoples here at this conference. And I would, your organization has been working in 12 countries, if I understand correctly, right? Providing grants. What do you think is so this new granting mechanism actually enables one to think about another scale of funding. What do you think is ready to be scaled up in terms of your work? Is it expanding number of countries, bringing things more thematic to a scale up? How do you imagine benefiting from that opportunity to make your work even more impactful?
So we are discussing, like the FACO fund is working in the country level in Nepal, and the DGM, delegated grant mechanism, working within the 12 country, like cases for the like a different country and different issues are raising, like indigenous people and local community, especially case for the carbon issues. We are raising the voice, more time are spending for the local community and conserve the forest. But sometimes is creating issue for the like a loan, issues for the loan. And the community people are protecting the forest, but some are supporting the like a loan, not as grant. So we are raising the voice that way. So I think maybe one of the important for the like a globally and the other all country, like how we can secure the rights for the local community and indigenous people and the carbon rights and the million resources going to the like a country level, and how can we secure and goes to the resource in directly in community people. Like we are raising the voice in the 100% resource need to go in the direct the community. So we are raising that voice.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to welcome Toya Mancinelli. So Toya, if you could introduce yourself. And we were here talking about the main theme of this discussion is rights and governance. And you're going to be sharing with us the experience of how to draw management plans, indigenous management plans within COIAB. So if you could explain what is your role within COIAB and that experience with planos gestores.
Primeiro, agradecer o convite, né, para participar desse evento, né, que é de suma importância para todos nós, né, dos povos indígenas ao não indígena, né, e no Brasil vamos dizer, de governo Bolsonaro, né, atualmente não podemos dizer que podemos fazer a gestão de um território bom, né? Que realmente não existe política, né, voltada mais para essa área, né? Mas há tempos os povos indígenas vêm fazendo o manejo e a utilização dos recursos naturais através de seus conhecimentos ancestrais, né? Então, o manejo, né, das florestas sempre foi e sempre será, né, um instrumento dos povos indígenas, né, para cuidar do seu território, né? E no Brasil, né, nós iniciamos um processo, né, que se chama gestão territorial dos territórios indígenas, né? Que significa fazer o mapeamento, né, do território e, a partir daí, ver as potencialidades que existem, tanto para a questão econômica, né, para as comunidades fazer seu trabalho, mas também a questão do fortalecimento cultural, das invasões dos territórios, né? Então, isso nós temos realizado, mas também feito a questão do monitoramento, né, que é uma parte também que serve para que a gente possa olhar de perto, né, o que existe no território e, a partir daí, fazer um planejamento, né, que se chama planos de vida, zoneamento ecológico e econômico, né, que se chamou, ou etnozoneamento, né? Então, é dessa forma, mas é necessário, né, que os estados possam mudar a sua política, né, ambiental, porque não é só os povos indígenas conservando e utilizando sua sabedoria ancestral para conservar a natureza que vai funcionar. Temos que fazer toda uma gestão do planeta para que possamos trabalhar em conjunto e, a partir daí, a gente organizar de forma adequada a utilização dos recursos naturais, né? Então, para isso é fundamental toda uma mudança de mentalidade, tanto dos empresários que acessam, né, os recursos naturais, dos políticos que fazem as leis ambientais, né, para que a ação seja conjunta, né? Porque está provado, né, cientificamente, através de nossos parceiros, né, que levantaram os dados, que os territórios indígenas são menos devastados, né, do que próprias, às vezes, unidade de conservação, né, que existe, né? Então, é necessário todo um cuidado de todo mundo para que possamos, né, manter a floresta em pé. E, claro, qualquer ação do Estado, ele tem que ser voltado também para o respeito aos direitos das populações que ali existem, né? Porque, caso contrário, nenhum programa de desenvolvimento vai dar certo, porque vai sempre estar a população contra o Estado e o Estado contra a população, né? Então, é necessário que os dois funcionem de comum acordo, né? Conhecendo a realidade, utilizando os conhecimentos que ali existem, e utilizando e incorporando esses conhecimentos nesses programas de desenvolvimento, né? Outra coisa que eu penso que é fundamental para que os povos indígenas contribuam mais é a questão do acesso aos recursos, né? A gente vê muita complicação na questão dos recursos dos fundos globais, dos fundos climáticos, né? Vamos dizer assim, hoje existe esses fundos, mas as populações indígenas não acessam diretamente, né? São de governo, de estado para estado. É necessário criar um mecanismo para que os recursos vão diretamente para as comunidades indígenas. E nós, do Brasil, nós temos construímos um mecanismo, né? Que se chama Fundo da Amazônia Brasileira, Fundo Indígena da Amazônia Brasileira, chamado PODALI, né? Que é nessa tentativa de captar o recurso, né? Para fortalecer, né, a organização social do povo, fortalecer seus laços familiares, seu conhecimento, né? Porque é só dessa forma que nós vamos também conseguir mais defender a floresta. Caso contrário, nós todos vamos plantar soja, né? Ou seja, né, geralmente também a gente brinca muito que diz o seguinte: quem devasta a floresta que ganha o dinheiro. Os povos indígenas que conservam não tem nada, só ficam com as doenças. Então é necessário inverter isso, né? É necessário colocar o dinheiro na mão certa, né? E que os estados possam fazer uma política de maneira que incorpore toda a sabedoria do povo, né, que mora na região amazônica. Obrigado.
Muito obrigado, Toya. And I'd like, at this moment, to open the floor for questions. So if there are any questions on your side, it would be a pleasure to hear. While we wait for questions, enquanto a gente espera, eu queria te perguntar uma coisa. Durante esse período tem sido muito difícil assegurar direito à terra no Brasil para as populações indígenas brasileiras. Eu nunca vi uma manifestação tão forte como nesse último mês em Brasília, em que milhares de indígenas, representantes de dezenas de povos indígenas, vieram à cidade para reclamar os seus direitos. Aqui está se prometendo uma quantidade razoável de recursos, mas é dinheiro. Então, quer dizer, como é que você pode transformar esse dinheiro em vontade política para realmente demarcar as terras que faltam ser demarcadas, para restaurar as áreas, sobretudo no sul do país, que também, sabe, você representa a parte norte, na parte da Amazônia, mas muito dos problemas indígenas no Brasil, da falta de terra, é no sul, e que tem muito pouca atenção, porque não carrega o nome Amazônia com ela. Então, diz para a gente como é que você pensaria nisso.
Bom, nós temos trabalhado, né, de maneira, vamos dizer, geral no Estado brasileiro com relação aos direitos dos povos indígenas, né? E aí a questão, por exemplo, dos recursos climáticos, nós sempre estamos trabalhando para que seja utilizado em todo o Estado brasileiro, nas populações indígenas, não só na Amazônia, né? A Amazônia seria o olhar, né, para entrar o dinheiro, mas que a população indígena não conserva só as florestas da Amazônia. Ela conserva no Cerrado, na Caatinga, né, em outros cantos. Então, também é merecedor, né, de acessar os recursos. Para a política dar certo, né, 1 milhão e não sei quantos mil dólares, né, foi prometido aqui, né, mas são promessas, né? E se realmente o recurso sair, é necessário que haja, né, a participação total dos povos indígenas, né? Desde a questão da concepção dos projetos que forem ser desenvolvidos no país até a implementação. Caso contrário, não vai dar certo, como já vem não dando certo, né? Tem vários recursos climáticos entrando nos estados e que serve apenas para comprar carro, para pagar funcionários muitas vezes, e que nas comunidades, nas unidades de conservação, tu não tem nada, né? Isso não é talvez só um caso brasileiro, isso seja um caso de Estado, né? Vamos dizer assim, né? E para isso nós temos, como eu falei, né, os governos têm que mudar a política, né? Os governos têm que mudar a política porque o planeta já não espera muito mais, né? Nós estamos já, vamos dizer assim, já saqueamos muito o planeta Terra, né? E agora ele precisa descansar. Caso contrário, todos nós vamos perecer sobre, né, sobre as consequências que for acontecer com o planeta, né, com todo o sistema, né, que existe.
Thank you. So, a question from the... I'll take that. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm Nicola. I'm producing a documentary about the Aral Sea in Uzbekistan. And my question... sorry, is it better now? Okay, sorry. My question is, when projects need a scientific approach, either from, Western countries or like a national approach, a scientific approach, what are the mechanisms, to like make a cooperation of knowledge, practices, actions between scientists and local communities, and how this can become sustainable by, involving local communities in like data collection, analyze, that stay within the region, because sending scientists, leading like scientific expedition, it costs a lot of money, and like money is kind of the issue of many, many things. So how can this be sustainable by, creating this co-production between local communities and scientists? Yeah, thank you.
Would any of you like to take that question on indigenous knowledge and science?
So I think, coming from conservation organizations, we obviously have science departments. We put out a lot of publications related to the environment. I'll just speak very generally. However, that work mostly is not done unless we work with communities on the ground. And I think where science and scientists and the scientific community needs to catch up with what is going on is that many times that work could never have been done without indigenous peoples and local communities. And normally when scientific papers are published, that acknowledgement is not there. And I think part of that transformation has to happen not only in the collaborative work we do on the ground, and I think there's many examples of where that incorporation of traditional knowledge is happening on the ground, but it is not happening enough at the global level. We do know here at the COP, there is a local communities and indigenous peoples platform, and part of that negotiation and that discussion was to be able to bring traditional knowledge into this space, make sure it's acknowledged and recognized. But the scientific community and that co-creation, as we've been talking about, also has to happen between communities and the scientific community and our own organizations. Our own organizations have to be more accountable to that, and trust me, I am a disruptor in my own institution, that we need to be more accountable. We need to make sure that that voice and that knowledge of indigenous communities is very present in the research and publishing, because we are all trying to save the planet. And just as we're talking about the perspectives of indigenous peoples and holistic agreements and in mechanism, again, it's co-creation. And how do we really balance that co-creation and recognition?
Okay.
É uma pergunta bastante interessante e que muitas vezes eu falo o seguinte, que nenhum conhecimento ele é total, né? Então é necessário que, para que a coisa dê certo, é necessário primeiro que cada conhecimento respeite o outro conhecimento, né? Não queira ser maior do que o outro, né? Eu penso que dessa forma dá para a gente trabalhar tanto com conhecimento dos povos indígenas, com conhecimento, né, científico e com a academia. Porque todos os conhecimentos são necessários para que a gente possa, né, vamos dizer assim, fazer um bom planejamento, fazer um bom projeto e, a partir daí, começar a implementação, né, vamos dizer, dos projetos nos territórios, né? E, claro, sempre trazendo a participação indígena, não como, né, muitas vezes se fez no Brasil, se fez várias reuniões para os povos indígenas olhar e, a partir daí, dizer, não, foi consultado, mas realmente trabalhar o projeto, né, do início ao final, né? Então é necessário, né, haver esse respeito e a partir daí começar a trabalhar em conjunto. Eu particularmente acho que nós temos muito a ganhar se cada um respeita e cada um leva seu conhecimento, não para a disputa e nem para, vamos dizer, qualificar a ideia do outro, mas a complementação, né? Eu acho que dessa forma nós conseguimos fazer muito e muito mais.
You want? Yeah, please.
Good morning.
Oh, sorry. She was going to. No, keep it. She's going to say. It's okay.
I'm agree with her point, especially like in local level, more in the community level, more traditional practice is there. Science is important, but many research paper need to highlight to the traditional practice for the local community, indigenous people, which is used to in the community level. So that will be linkage to the science and the technology, and one is the important for the transfer the technology to the local community and respect the local knowledge and traditional practice. I think that will be very important. Yeah.
First, I want to thank the panel for really fascinating conversation. I want to maybe twist the conversation a little bit and ask about progress on SDG 7, so electrification. So in indigenous communities, we have seen a real history of lack of ability to really make their own decisions on electrification. So unsustainable practices, whether that's diesel generator sets in local communities or damming up local rivers, and really a push to putting decisions in the local communities, whether that's towards indigenous access to rural electrification services that are more sustainable, solar or other sustainable practices. Can you comment on the progress you've seen in local communities over the last couple of decades towards really local decision making around energy rights?
Bueno, el tema de acceso a electrificación y otros servicios básicos es muy importante, no solo como la electricidad como uso en la casa, sino para que sea para ciertos aspectos, inclusive para transporte, ¿no es cierto? En Coica, en la Amazonía, nosotros se ha hecho algunos programas de acceso a la electricidad de las comunidades como parte de su gestión territorial. El tema es que implementar eso es un poco caro, y la tecnología no está, digamos, diseñada para que dure mucho tiempo a largo plazo, sino más o menos corto. Tenemos experiencia también con el transporte solar que se ha implementado en la Amazonía ecuatoriana. Igual no ha tenido éxito porque no se ha desarrollado todavía suficiente fuerza para los ríos caudalosos del Amazonas. Entonces ese es un desafío, pero nosotros no estamos viendo la electricidad, bueno, la pregunta como simplemente la iluminación, sino dentro de eso crear como por ejemplo un mecanismo de economía comunitaria, familiar, que con la generación eléctrica tú puedes tener inclusive proceso de sacar agua, de hacer productos de valor agregado, secado de semillas, cosas así. O sea, lo estamos pensando de manera integral. Sin embargo, no ha habido suficiente inversión o suficiente apoyo externo para poder implementar esta línea de iniciativa, pero sí estamos con ese interés de trabajar. Muchas gracias.
We'll take the 2 questions and then we'll answer to them. Please.
Thank you very much. Ebony Holland from the International Institute for Environment and Development. I wanted to come back to one of the points that an earlier speaker made around challenges with accessing some of the funds from the climate finance institutions getting down to the local level. I wondered if you could elaborate a bit further on what some of those challenges are, what the experience has been with accessing finance from those funds, and what you think would be some great solutions to overcome those barriers.
Can we take also the second question? So those will be the 2 last questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think thank you for all the panelists for bringing the local initiative practice to here. And let me introduce myself. I'm Ghanashyam Pandey. I'm from Nepal. I'm also the chairperson of small organization Green Foundation Nepal, which is the observer representative in the DGM steering committee in Nepal. So I would like to ask, maybe you are able to respond better. You know, in Nepal and in many part of the world, there is a big kind of the untrust on the role of the larger big conservation organization, that they are not really doing the respecting the human rights in the natural resource management. You know, going to any international organization to the country and they have contacted with the national government and they do what the national government said, but they have the commitment to work with the local communities, indigenous peoples, but in the real sense, that has not been happening at the ground level. That is one critique. So how the larger international conservation organization will change their theory of work with the indigenous people and local communities, that one. And then the last one is the climate finance is again going to capture by the elite and larger organization, which is being big threat to the indigenous and local communities. So how we can make that in a real sense to reach to the local communities and indigenous peoples together here. Thank you.
Thank you. So who would like to take those two questions? Yeah.
A primeira pergunta, né, ela é fácil de responder sobre, né, o acesso dos povos indígenas e aos fundos climáticos, né? Primeiro, o Estado tem que ver a gente como parte, não como observador, né, para a coisa dar certo, né? E quando as políticas, né, os recursos são destinados ao Estado, ele sempre vê a gente como observador, não seres com direito, né, a políticas públicas, né? Então essa questão tem que mudar. E nós no Brasil, né, vendo toda essa política de fundos climáticos e o Estado sempre negando, nós criamos um fundo chamado Fundo Podal, que eu já falei aqui, né, que é a maneira da gente captar o recurso, né, de fundos climáticos para ir direcionar diretamente às comunidades indígenas, né? Por exemplo, nós temos o Fundo Amazônia, né, mas no Brasil apenas 2 organizações indígenas acessaram, porque a burocracia é tão grande que é feito para grandes empresas, vamos dizer, acessar o recurso, né? Então, nós temos que também criar mecanismos com facilidade para que as comunidades acessem esses recursos, né?
Would you like some concluding words?
Yeah, I think, you know, speaking from a conservation organization perspective, in terms of funding access, our own institutions are a problem. You know, we have had to be accountable to funding agencies, and those funding agencies have to be accountable to the governments and the parties that give them money. And many of the things that we have been looking at is how do we actually get those resources? It's from small things like how do you make sure a wire transfer that's going to an indigenous person or an organization that they don't have to incur the cost of that wire transfer. Something as basic and unexciting as that is extremely important. The other thing is that when we have to, you know, we all have to assess the risks of organizations that we work with. Indigenous organizations are typically risked high, and COIAB and CI have been having a conversation, and that's created an entire conversation internally about the challenges that our own staff have with our own requirements and how do we transform them. We need to be accountable, and we all recognize that, but how do we make adjustments and tweaks to make the delivery of that funding more holistic on that front? I would
like to conclude first by thanking you all. And I think this amount of funding that is being made available for the first time at this level actually creates an opportunity for fundamentally changing things. Right now, for example, our organizations have been the ones receiving funding and giving to indigenous people. I think this actually offers the opportunity to reverse and say it's up to them to choose with what partners would they like to work under their terms. I think this is a very important opportunity that is taken that way. And I would like to thank all of you for your excellent ideas about demonstrated already that there are very good governance mechanisms in place, that we're still far away from getting to the rights that we need to get. But the opportunity of these funds, we need to really transform it in a way that most of these funds actually go directly through your own organizations. And we hear your quest for becoming parties and no longer observers. And I say, well, this is going to be a long fight. But I'd like to thank you all for being with us, and thank you, and some applauses for our excellent speakers. So thank you. Thank you.